as we have, as we're sat at the feet of Jesus on the side of that mountain, hearing Jesus say, hey, this is what it's about, guys. This is what my kingdom's about. I want you to understand these things. The kind of person through whom the kingdom comes and through whom the kind of person the kingdom flows, okay? He's saying this is how it goes. We know what the kingdom of this world is. We know the father of the world is very different than my kingdom. So he starts talking to them about who would come. I want you to know that this morning I feel like it's really deeply personal and powerful word that I know that all who follow him seem to follow him get really confused. And Grace, I kind of realized we talked last week for so long. And, I'm glad you're here because I want to encourage your heart. You're not alone in this stuff, and God's made a way. And I get really excited because it gets cloudy for us. In this church age, Christ is coming, it's going to come again. And we deal with our flesh, we deal with the world, yet we have the power of God, we have the peace of God. And it is a confusing time. The church age is confusing sometimes. But again, it's so important that we start with the abiding in him, right? It's so important that we understand that it's not in our strength, it's in our surrender that God's power comes. It came to the broken. He's got guys, there's power, there's healing, there's all this stuff, authority and honor, but it doesn't come the way you think. It comes when we come to the end of ourselves and we acknowledge our need for him. He says, blessed are you who are poor in spirit, when you're not as solid as all those other religious people that look all that. I have come for the broken. I've come for those who will trust me. Blessed are you who come to the end of yourself. You get given this gift that is beyond measure. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who mourn, who get out, who grieve your sin. You know what it's there. You say, God, here it is. You get comforted. You understand through that, you get meek, you get more gentle, you become more like a soothing medicine than a gentle breeze for the world. You care for your brother, Grace. You flow with compassion for the woman who's been mocked, and you want to bring grace. You want to bring the mercy and breath of God. Because you've experienced it. You've hungered and thirsted for righteousness. You've seen it and lack it, right? Don't we lack it? As much as we are religious, Melissa, and we try so hard, we ain't got it. And he says, hey, I'll give you my righteousness. How's that for an exchange? You don't have enough anyway. And then you're going to care about justice for others because you've experienced it. You're not going to just look the other way. You're going to care. You're going to have a heart for other people. You're going to flow with mercy because you've experienced my mercy. You don't get harder. You get softer. You don't get bigger and badder. You get more humble and grateful, and you care about other people and the injustice they're experiencing, and you hunger and thirst for all that is wrong to be made right. That's kingdom people. That's what we look like. That's what we taste like. That's what we smell like, the aroma of the compassion that God gave us. We care about other people. We don't stiff arm them. We forgive them. We love our enemy. You don't do that in the flesh. Jesus comes with the power of the Spirit that we can actually forgive people, love people, and include those who have been excluded. Bring near those who were far off. That's what this kingdom does, and it's through his people who flow with the mercy and see the need for mercy, and we have mercy on others. Because we've experienced them. Me personally, he heard my cry, and he lifted me out of my slimy pit, and that's shared out of all our testimonies that he heard us. He saw us, Elena, he heard us personally at our cry. He came personally to us. This isn't about a religious story and love. This is about a personal relationship where the believers encourage one another because we know what it is to be forgiven. We're a Me Too church. We are judging others. We're sharing mercy that we've received. We have a pure heart. We belong with a pure heart because we know that God cares about what's on the inside, not just what we look like, not just how religious we sound or the acts we do, but he ministers deeply with a pure heart. It's the inside that matters. You can fool the world. You can fool the people in church. God wants our heart, and that's a very big difference. The kingdom is about an intrinsic reality, not an external compliance or a cloak of decency. It's the inside. So we have a pure heart that it's the inside that matters to God. You will see God. Blessed are you who have a pure heart. You will see God. And then we moved into the blessed are the peacemakers with all this compassion with this. We can't just pretend to be peacekeepers. We're not interested in just a superficial thing. We care about how things really are on the inside. We're going to step into the conflicts. We're not going to avoid the conflicts. We're not going to appease, avoid, placate, and say peace, peace when there is no peace. We can't just look aside and say, oh, everybody's happy. No, not everybody's happy. There's a lot of wounds. Grace, I love your heart. You feel the wounds of God's people. God doesn't like when the wounds of his people are dealt with lightly. He doesn't call us to be the Messiah. Because when we start getting rid of the Messiah, then we have a Messiah's complex. And now we're just getting, we have a heart of compassion that we call them to Jesus, not to us. We don't have all the answers, Jesus does, but we can't just placate. We can't look the other way anymore. We're going to have to walk in and confront some things, and we know what we're going to be persecuted for. I don't want to use that too grandiose. Persecution sounds like the missionaries being tortured and martyred. Okay, but listen, Jesus said, every one of you who follow me, you will be persecuted. And I want to encourage you, Grace, when you're confused by the crap going on, you get confused because it's confusing. So I'm really excited to bring some clarity to this very mucky world of persecution and what could be self-righteous suffering or what is actually, get used to it. You're gonna pay a price. Don't be surprised that these things are happening to you, something foreign. This is how it goes. When you stand up for righteousness, to bring restorative justice, you're going to be hated. You're going to indict those that have blocked people out or have become smug in their own ways. So it's the progression. This is the end of the Beatitudes. Okay, so it began with blessed are you when you're broken. You get to give them the kingdom. Now it ends with all this progression. And now you're going to be persecuted for righteousness. Hey, take heart. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so it's kind of a bookend thing. The literary, I love scripture and how brilliant the writers were. It's like you can't even imagine how put together this stuff is. But be assured, you guys, Jesus said, you're going to run into hostility. You can count on it, okay? Grace, you're going to run into this hostility. Listen to the last Beatitudes, verse 10 of chapter 5, the final Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you, listen, friends, blessed are you when people cast insults at you and persecute you and say all sorts of evil things against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice, you guys. Rejoice and be glad. Check that out. Rejoice and be glad because your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you, we're in good company, okay? And I hope this isn't too far removed from what you experienced, but I hope I can bring light. It took me a long time in ministry through the confusions, Grace. I was a senior pastor, and I was so confused. How is this happening? God, what are you doing? Are you here? Do you see? What are they saying? Why are they doing that? Why am I getting beat up here? I don't even get this stuff. So it's a gift I want to give you that took a lot of pain and insight, and I hope in each of your hearts, God will speak to you in a way that you need to understand, okay? So Holy Spirit, come among us right now, in this little gathering at the Door of Covenant Church in Blaine, as you came to your disciples 2,000 years ago, you strengthened them, through whom your kingdom would come to people. Crazy sharing of the word that redeems people by your Spirit. It's foolishness to those who are perishing, to those who are, it's the power of God for your salvation. We don't know how you do it, but we know apart from you, we don't have it. So we ask you to come now. Open our eyes, that we will be strengthened in the calling you've given us to follow you and share the good news of great joy, which is for everybody. Thank you for your power within us. Be glorified now, Father, in Jesus' name. So this morning I want to start with a question, you guys. Like, what is the reason for the conflict? What is the reason for the persecution, right? Because it is very confusing. Why would persons who care about bringing freedom and forgiveness and love to other people, why in the world would they be persecuted, right? Don't you kind of go, why would believers who love people and want to see the grace of me too, if you can forgive me, why do they get persecuted? It's crazy, isn't it? Am I alone in thinking that? You just so loving people and you're going to get crucified and killed. Like, what? God, what are you doing? What's going on here? Why would broken people mourning over their sin, finding comfort and healing and hunger after righteousness, no, they don't have it. They move merciful in the world. Why would they be slandered and reviled and opposed? Well, our text says this, in verse 10 says, for righteousness. Okay, well, what do you do? I don't even understand it, right? Right? It sounds so holy. Good for you. What does it mean for righteousness' sake? I still don't get it. Remember in the family with the no-talk rule, and they say, hey, there's a problem here. There's people in pain here. If you think about that, we talk about how they'll be the ones persecuted because, you know, you're saying, not everything's okay. We lost people from this church because Carmen asked the word. Is it fair to say that that's your narrative? Maybe some African American people have a different narrative. Can you feel that? It can become an indictment on people when they want to pretend everybody's happy. Everybody's good in the family. No, the girl being molested is not okay. And God hates when we pretend it's all okay, but it's not really okay. He doesn't like the injustice. He hates when people are being injured and discriminated against and are suffering. Don't ignore that. I want you to be courageous, strong and courageous, step into things. I'm low, I will be with you. Always do it. So think about this, guys. Find people. I think of my first church, Lord forgive me, but it's my experience of a decade long. Let's say you have five fine people. Everybody's looking good. Everybody's, very nice. They're religious. They're churchy. I'd say they pretend no struggle types, And then you have one person among them that God lands on, and they realize, holy crap, man, I got brokenness. The truth is, I got sin, I got brokenness. I need help. They begin to authentically mourn, get broken, and then they find God's grace, His hope, His forgiveness, and He's got a plan and a purpose even through the pain, and they get really excited. His grace has comforted them, and now they respond with great gratitude and joy. They're like, God, you're amazing. I was in the slimy pit in the muck and mire, and you heard my voice, and you lifted out of me out of my slimy pit, out of my muck and mire, set my feet on the rock, and you put a new song in my mouth, you want great. And you have somebody that's excited now? What does that do to the other four people? What do you think? When they're standing there crying and worshiping, they're going, God, I can't believe you're this good. And everybody else is kind of sitting there going, something's happening. Right? There's something that's happened that's deep and it's real and it's powerful, it's transforming. And if I don't have that, I'm going, that's a subtlety, but it comes this way. It's going to make those around them very uncomfortable, and it's also perhaps going to expose their lack of real love and real heart and real passion for God. It starts to go, I remember as a kid going to some big thing, and the guy next to me is crying. During worship, he's just crying. I'm like, man, whatever that guy's got going on, I want that. I want to love God like that. I want to be that hungry for God. I remember that I was in a nice little Watermelon Social Gospel Church. We all looked good, we were fine, we just got sat there. And I remember God started speaking to me, though, because God can do it anywhere. The liturgy, I remember crying over liturgy. Everyone thought I was crazy, but I was like, God, the forgiveness thing, the cleansing. It just meant something to me. And I got on fire, right? What did Mama Blaine say? Oh, you'll get over it, right? You're kind of making me nervous when you talk all this Jesus, you're giving your life to him, you're going to serve him with your life. Son, I hope you get over that. Because it makes me uncomfortable. Right? That just kind of happens. It's just part of the deal. What if when someone is actually mourning, finding comfort and freedom, and they really love God with all their heart, and they volunteer like one of our people? This is one of the early people. We had her share her testimony here. She had 5 husbands. She was a drug addict. She came to Christ. She couldn't believe it. She'd hide in the hallway when I'd be preaching because the word of God was on her and the Spirit was moving in her. And she loved God so much. She volunteered as my secretary for 30 hours a week for 3 years straight. That makes the choir director who was wanting to be paid for every 30 minutes look kind of funny. It's a little bit of an indictment. Not that she shouldn't make money. I'm just saying, but when somebody's on fire and your wife, do you stand up during worship and she lay down at the weirdest times and she was crazy. She was so full of this and it made everybody uncomfortable. I wish you'd sit down and shut up like the rest of us, right? if one among us, one of the five, starts hungry and thirsting genuinely after God and starts getting real honest and confess sin. Another guy in the first church came in, he had been with a prostitute, he was hungover, he smoked like a chimney, so he stopped and he looked like he had showered in a week. He came in among us, and there were people sharing their testimony during that service. It was a testimony Sunday. We had, I think, 10 testimonies of people that had been delivered and free, and they had to declare the praises of him who called them out of darkness into his marvelous light. And he came in among us, and he was with a prostitute the night before, hadn't been in church for years and years and years and years, and he walks in, and people are sharing what God had done in their life, and he's like, holy crap, like, his brother asked him when he was leaving, where are you going? He goes, I don't know, but I think I'm going to church. God brought him into the church at the right exact time where he's hearing this, and then he grabs the mic and he goes, you know, I abandoned my daughter 10 years ago, and now she's abandoned me. It sucks. And we went, me too, we get that. And from that day on, for years and years and years, he was our greatest servant. Talk about a foot washer. He literally washed my feet as I washed his, as we served the community. We had the storm camp in the city, which was to bring the grace and love and actually to building and helping. Long story short, that made our other fine people really, what's going on? It kind of makes me nervous. No, I don't like the fact he smokes because it stings. They're concerned about external. He should wash his hair, but well, you know what? Okay. God cares about his heart. God loved his heart. He knew it, and he responded to it. Very powerful. So as long as churchy people stay churchy, nobody gets real, and nobody gets moved by the Holy Spirit, everything's fine. But get somebody in there that's hungry or broken or honest about their sin or confronts injustice, so that true peace can come. Look out. Not just keep the peace. So many pastors I know, guys, the truth is, want to be liked more than they want to see others change. Because believe me, there's a real decision in pastoring. You either make people like you, and you can do that and kiss their butt, or if you care more about lives being changed, you will be persecuted. I don't understand why, but it happens, and I'm going to explain part of how that happens through the Word. It always has happened like that. It always will. We're in the church age. Jesus says, you will be persecuted. Okay, are we clear? He didn't say if, he said when. You will be. You will be. When you follow me, everyone who will, you will experience persecution. You don't have to go looking for it, by the way. It'll happen, but you're not alone. You're like with the prophets. Be encouraged. You're in good company. This is how it goes down. If they did it to me, they're going to do it to you. So in Luke chapter 6, I told you about this last time or the time before, but it was a wake-up call for me when Jesus heals the guy with the withered hand. Are people that cruel? And from that point on, the Pharisees sought to kill him. And you're like, he's doing a nice thing. Are you so evil you don't want nothing nice to other people? No. Are you that pissed that he does it on the Sabbath day? Break your rule, but he had more compassion for broken than about your little rule, your little church rule? Are they really that cruel that they don't care about people? Or are they that mad that he broke the rule? Are they mad that he did nice things for people? I mean, what's going on? Why are they, from that moment on, it says only wanted, from that moment on, the subject. The reason I shared before, they hated Jesus, they sought to get rid of him, and eventually they tortured him, crucified him. Revealed the fact that these Pharisees, with all their religiosity, orthodoxy, all their white, clean hands people, didn't have any, they lacked the compassion for one, but they didn't have the power of God. It revealed their lack of power, of conviction, of mercy, of compassion. It revealed what they, even though they were the corner on God people, there was nothing going on. Lives weren't being transformed. They made people twice the sons of hell of themselves. They put weights on people's backs and did nothing to free them. And they called that God. It wasn't God, it was religion. And Jesus was upset with that. And he revealed by his actions and his word that there's a whole different power and authority and all this stuff that transforms lives, and it ain't coming from that. It's not coming from his list of rules. It's coming from this relationship with the Holy One and the power of God. Because you can do a lot of stuff in the flesh. Some of that might look like people that are responding, as we say, as a humble and grateful people to God's power in our lives by His Spirit, and they might look similar, but it's extremely different. Man looks at the outward appearance, right? God looks at the heart. So what do you think happens then? If you bring the power of God into a group of people that are proud, self-righteous, self-reliant, status quo, religious people, but impotent, what's going to happen? Those people are going to resent you like crazy. You're moving in the power of God. It's always been that way this happens. We see it in Jesus early on. We see it in the disciples from there, and now it's continuing on. Those who are godly will suffer, guaranteed. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, all those who desire to live godly lives will suffer. Grace, did you hear me? All those who desire to live godly lives will suffer. You're in good company. Don't be surprised. Christy, as a kid, I was at my 40th class reunion yesterday. I got a picture. If you want to see my senior picture, Dad didn't have to wear that along with Jack Shields and my senior picture. It's in my pocket. If you want to see it, it's hilarious. Really nice feather here, by the way. I got the prettiest locks. Not most godly man. Pretty locks. Okay, so it was really significant. At any rate, one of the gals there. So listen, even in this way, I was sitting across from this gal I hadn't seen in 40 years, and she's telling me she was they know I'm a pastor from North Minneapolis today. They probably don't know, but they like me. And I was very happy that they haven't seen me. But she, for example, in this world today, was a realtor and sold a house to an African family. And she got so much heat from those neighbors, they were furious. You can't do that. And she's like, redlining is gone. I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. Amen. She got persecuted. She got despised. She got hated for selling her house to an African family, right? That's a sort of persecution. You're doing the right thing. You're not going to let redlining be the case. And you're going to say, no, I'm selling this house, like it or not, hate me or not. That's what we're going to do. So that's what she did. That's just one example. I think of my daughter, Christy. She didn't want to go along when the kids were being mean to a kid. And then they turned on her and called her goody two-shoes. She wasn't being self-righteous. Listen, she wasn't being judgmental. She just didn't want to go along being mean. Like the damn kids, I'm sorry, but that makes me mad. Teasing a woman who got hit by a car, that's not okay. And if you don't go with that, you say, that's not okay, who's going to get hit? You're going to be the target. But you'll also bring maybe some others that are looking at you who go on, there's something about that girl that smacks some truth to me. So you'll draw as salt and light in the world, you'll draw, but you will at the same time become a target. That's how it is. Get used to it, man. I remember Christy also leaving the popular table and went and sat at the lonely kid's table, the alone kid. And that was raised eyebrows about that, but it did get worse when she was called, it really hurt her that she was called goody two-shoes. She wasn't trying to be holier than thou. She just didn't want to be mean. Just that's how it's subtle. So I'm trying to give you examples that you will be persecuted when you say, no, they're not okay. You want to think they're happy. They're not happy. They feel discriminated against. Can you hear that? Do you care? Do you have compassion? Or fake news? What's in your heart? Do you care about people that say, I've experienced this kind of pain? No, you didn't. That's fake news. That is not what God does. He hears the cry of his people. He cares about the cry of his people. He doesn't like when you say peace, peace when there is no peace. He wants you to care enough to hunger and thirst after restorative justice for those that are being. Think about your own family, or think about yourself. When you were hurting and nobody cared, aren't you glad God cared? Aren't you glad it came to you? You cannot give that as you've received that, okay? It's not allowed. You can't go hating. You've been forgiven. You've been received. You've been brought in. How do you stiff arm out? You can't do that. I've been on that high horse before, but no. I'll move on. Jesus had an internal focus with spirit eyes and compassion. He wasn't impressed. That's it. Wasn't impressed with all their external compliance, all the religious people. They thought Jesus was coming. Oh, you had good hand washing. Oh, that was fantastic. You missed a little under the arm, but that's okay. He didn't do that. He was not impressed with their focus. And it made them mad that you didn't join me with my circle and commended us for what we did. he had a lot of tough words for them, and it didn't go well for him when he stepped into the truth that internal matters more than external. And they weeped and gnashed their teeth at him. Because he exposed, he wasn't a they saw, he knew it was an external show, and he exposed them. So they were upset with him. Exposing their lack, too, by the power and grace that came and flowed through him. And that's why they hated him. And if you're a kingdom person, they're going to hate you too, okay? Grace, you're in good company. John 15, listen to Jesus. If the world hates you, keep in mind, Jesus said, that it hated me first. Okay, listen. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. He says, like, listen up. He says, you will be persecuted. I can't read my writing, it's really little, but he's letting you know, hey, it's going to happen. Now, sometimes in the church, hear me on this, you guys, we call persecution something that's not. Like when a church or a church person presents to the world a holier than thou thing, you deserve to be judged, you know. Seriously, I remember when I was ordained, listen, this is funny. A guy got rejected, and he said because he was too evangelical, he was too solid on the word. And I'm looking at him going, no, it's because you're a jerk. You got deferred, you got rejected because you actually are self-righteous and you're judgmental. So sometimes church people, oh, I'm being persecuted. Well, no, maybe you're just being a jerk, right? That's the other possibility, correct?
Yes.
So we can say, oh, I'm being persecuted, and you're really being a jerk. So not all persecution is for Jesus' sake. Sometimes you got to learn to get off your high horse, right? That's part of the other deal. We got to look at that. We got to listen to that. Some folks have mistakenly deceived themselves into calling this judgmental stuff persecution for righteousness' sake. That's not true. I remember some 30 years ago, again at the conference, and this guy saying that he was rejected. I kind of knew he was really a weird kind of. You didn't feel the spirit guy. You felt judged, and he got rejected. So anyway, so tension and turmoil in and of itself is not sufficient evidence to say that I'm being persecuted for Jesus. Often it can be because you haven't been broken yet. You haven't been humbled yet. And God will oppose the proud. He gives grace to the humble. But if you haven't been humbled yet, you're not moving with the power of God, and you're not being persecuted for righteousness' sake. You're being persecuted because you're a jerk. That's my summation. Sometimes the tension is because those around us are persecuting us, and sometimes not. Okay. 1 Peter 2, 19 and 20. Grace, sometimes Peter says it's commendable if you bear up under the pain of injustice, unjust suffering because of your relationship with God. But listen, if you're acting bitter or rigid or dried up or you're suffering because of that, don't you dare put on the garb of a persecuted martyr. You ought to be miserable. The word's pretty clean. Peter's not messing around. He's like, don't get all self-righteous and be a jerk and judge people and be persecuted and say, oh, it's because of God. No. Because you're not learning your lessons yet about humility. Me too. You're maybe doing what you should. And you should people may not be displaying the grace of God. So we must pay attention to the tension we feel and let God break us if we need. Because it might be the very gift we need is to get broken of our own martyr complex. I'm not the Messiah. I cared about people. I don't want to share. But I got so into my own importance. I get broken at that. It goes back to God. I can't do this. And then he says, Jack, will you let me be God? Be still, let me be God. Because the word I needed to get broken of my own importance. So that let God's Spirit do His work in us, and we will be more affected by His power work within us, and less about my own righteousness. So, we may need, and it might be a gift to us then too. I really believe that my exhaustion over being Mr. Christian, when I said I can't do this anymore, I'm done. I thought I was being done with Christianity. I thought I was being done with God, and He said, "That's right, Jack. Let go. All that stuff you think you have to do to be loved. I love you just the way you are. Will you be still, Grace? Let me be God. I love you just the way you are. It's my power, not yours. And the personal word you mentioned today, Lynn, I cannot describe how he said, Jack, I love you. Melissa, I love you. Not because you serve me, not because you, I love Melissa. And it's such a personal, deep word. It changed me. It just melted me. And I can't explain that if you don't get that, but God does that. I'm not the only one. It happens over and over. God speaks to a person intimately, deeply. We're utterly abased in our surrender to God until it comes so personally, and then He gives you that gift. And now you got the power of God, because now you're going to persevere when you're persecuted. You just got to keep loving. Just like I kept resisting and He kept loving me. He finally won. He melted me. So now I can put up with people's resistance and understand why sometimes. And we have people real close to us that aren't getting it yet. We can persevere. We don't get mad. We don't start hating. We just keep loving. We keep grace, we keep ourselves abiding. So we're full of love, patient. Blessed are you when people revile you, because God's broken you and you have more of your sin. God's mercy has freed you, and with a pure heart after God, you're seeking to deal with what's real and not superficial, and see others free and forgiven, and you want them to be reconciled to God, God of grace. No longer wanting to or willing to play games or play church. Blessed are you when people revile you for loving the least and the last. You go sit with people at the table that are popular, the losers, the limpers, the left out. Blessed are you when people judge you for that. You care more about how things are and how things look. You care more about transforming lives and being light. So another question, guys. Where does the opposition come from, do you think? Where does the persecution come from? Easy to jump to the world. Oh, the world, it's the world that does it. The world hates you. And if you look at Jesus, a lot of the world loved him. He loved them. It's just kind of weird, but sinners, if we're doing it right, I think often will at least experience grace and compassion. Me too, rather than you should. There's less persecution than that level. But I want to say something. It's very interesting. It's important to understand that the world is not just out there, okay? Here's the weird thing. It's in the church. It is in the church. The persecution actually first comes there because Jesus calls us first to the church people, the temple people. If Satan can render the church impotent, the kingdom will never get into the world. Okay, that's really interesting. But you got to know, the first front of opposition will not be from the world out there. The first front of opposition will be from the world that is in the church. It's not the woodpeckers out there, Colin. It's the termites within that can destroy and stop this kingdom power and flow. Jesus pointed this reality out when he told his disciples, and I'm telling you, don't now go first to the Gentiles or to the city of Samaria or any of the Samaritans. I don't want you to go there yet. The first place I want you to go is to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Who are they? They were God's people in the time they were thought to be. Go into the God's house first and bring the kingdom there. The kingdom has to start there, because if it doesn't, it'll never get into the world. It'll be too confusing. If we have a lot of termites and Christian people that turn everybody in the world away from God because they see this behavior and they're not, just clean hands people, and people can feel that. Jesus started by cleaning the temple, right? He turned the tables. He started in-house. And then he said this. He said, I need to warn you guys, when I send you into the house of God, listen, to people who think they're God's people, I'm sending you as a sheep among wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will deliver you up into their courts, and they're going to scourge you, and you in their synagogues on account of me. So he's warning them, and I'm warning you. He is not talking about people in the world at this point. He's talking about the religious establishment, the Pharisees, the scribes, the chief priests. The first wave of opposition is going to come from there. We got to understand this. Confrontation is going to come right there. And again, I shared with you some stories, but in that first church, I still remember how confusing it was, but how, again, when the addicts would come, they would just pour out, and they're so grateful. It was an indictment. And the people didn't like that. They didn't want the ethnic minorities. They didn't want the smokers. They didn't want the prostitutes, which we had as well. They didn't like that. They were worried about who's going to pay your salary. That's that it was confusing. They got angry. But the kingdom and the power of God was happening. Lives are being transformed. So when you expose a wolf in sheep's clothing, don't expect the wolf to lick your hand. Okay? Can I just say it that way?
Yes.
Don't expect them to lick your hand. They're going to be angry. They're going to leave an extra teeth like they did to Jesus. It's strange. Now, this is very important, and I do want to hit this one real quick. Then we can be done with it. Don't forget, here's the thing about, we need to understand, Jesus is very clear this. We are Hebrews, and we weren't back then. We are 20th century Christians, not 21st century people. But in Galatians chapter 4, Paul's telling them, you need to understand, it's a sheep and the wolf story. There's Ishmael and there's Isaacs, okay? There's Ishmael's and there's Isaacs. If you know, both call Abraham their father. Oh, Abraham's our father. They sound the same. So he's talking to these Ishmael and Isaac, to a church that had lost their first love. They had lost the inner life with God's power and authority and joy, and had bought an external focus to bear, right? Do's and don'ts of religion, dietary laws, duty, compliance, and all that. So Paul says, listen to me, guys. The church, the temple, the religious has two kinds of people in it, okay? Redeemed people and people that think they are. There's redeemed people and those that think they are redeemed. Both of which call God their father. Abraham's our father. It's Ishmael and Isaac, both call Abraham their father. But there's a fundamental, crucial difference, okay? Paul explains, and he who has ears, let him hear. In our circle right here at the door, I hope you get the wisdom, the power, the Spirit's discernment on this. But there's an Ishmael that is born of flesh. Remember Hagar and Abraham? God said, I'll do this nation through you, and he did the flesh. He went and slept with the handmaiden. He went and slept with the assistant, and he did it in his flesh. He forced the issue. He ended up having Isaac, he ended up having Ishmael, born of the flesh, born of natural causes, born out of striving to make God's will happen, right? Abraham made a mistake. He thought he had to do it for God. When God said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, he thought, I got to take it in my own hands. So I'm going to sleep with the handmaid, and then we're going to have, and he ends up having Ishmael, okay? And then there's the son Isaac, who was born of the promise of God, by the Spirit of God, born of God, born of faith, supernatural causes out of God's promise. Both, however, call Abraham their father. So it's confusing. Are you with me on this? Is this making any sense? I think I've had so much study. I feel like this is so simple to me, but I think it may be very confusing. So just remember, in the church, you have wolves in sheep's clothing. You have people that say God's their father. There's no power. They're flesh. They look good. They do compliances. But it's not the Spirit of God. They're not born of God. It's an Ishmael versus an Isaac. But listen to what the word says. Just as in those days, the one who was born of flesh persecuted him who was born of the Spirit, so it is now also. NIV, it's the same now, the NIV says. It's the same thing now. That's Galatians 4, verse 29. You got to look it up because you're going to go, holy crap, this is really weird. And that's why I pray for you to have spiritual discernment, because it's really important. There's religious people. I'm going to have to close with this. Dang, I can't believe how slow I am today. But there's religious people, and there's the people that have that relationship with God. And it's one-on-one, but it's super real. The relationship with God, where you love God. I don't have to tell you to worship. I don't have to tell you to pray. You're going to pray. You're going to worship. You're going to love Him. And then you can be forced to do it by compliance in the church and make sure you look good. Don't ever cry. Just make sure you don't get honest, because it makes us uncomfortable when you're authentic. So there's the religion and there's relation. There's trying. That's flesh, trying, and there's trusting. The Pharisees, I do this, I do that for you, I do that. They said, I'm not like that guy. He says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner, and who's will justify? Not the one working so hard to be so white. responding to that amazing grace and kindness. Okay, so I can't do that any further, but I hope this is. Are you willing to say it? I don't. This is weird. I don't get this. Okay, thanks. So, if you got on here, we'll talk a little after, but I want to touch base free here. But I want you to be for grace when you're confused, like, what's going on? You're in good company. You're not alone. I mean, I'm pastoring a church. I'm going, why is this happening? I'm trying to give you a gift this morning that you're not crazy. Come on up here, please. And let's close in worship. And so, Father, this morning, I can't do more than I've done as far as I feel like the giving you gave me, but I did get through it, yet, Father. Not you don't also be judgmental and go around this area and try to, hey, you must be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not about that. Well, Father, we want to walk. You say, will you follow me? Will you receive me? Will you flow with grace? Will you forgive me? We want to be caught up in judging Christians and Isaacs, but Lord, you call us to be mindful. You said, so then it will be like that now, even the church. So, strengthen your people, Lord. May we leave here humble and grateful. For your most problem, you give grace to them. So, with that, we worship you, Jesus. Thank you for coming to us. Restoring us, promise, and the family God is and kindness and compassion and comfort and joy. Thank you for us. Thank you for the joy for you and do the cross, for you, shame, you do all this stuff. But then, encouragement of